Ciao tutti, it is the ChronoFather. This is my first video into watchmaking, and I really appreciate you taking the time to join me, no pun intended. I am a passionate engineer who loves and is obsessed with all things watches. I am by no means a professional. I am an amateur, and I do this as a hobby, and am looking forward to continue to grow in my skill, and I'm just glad to have you here. So this is a Ladies Datejust from 2000. It is a 79 173. It is a 26 millimeter Ladies Datejust that I have from a family friend. She loves this watch and she uses it all the time, and so let's dive in. We'll start first by taking some of the gunk and grease off of the actual case with a piece of pegwood. You saw us taking some out earlier from the actual case tube, and it just makes it easier when you're going in with the ultrasonic cleaner to make sure that all of it's removed and it's ready to go. So we'll align the hands here to make it easier for removal. I like to use a dial protector by Bergeon. Sometimes I utilize the plastic. But each of these hands are solid gold in beautiful shape. There is some marks from prior servicing. I mean, the watch is 25 years old at this point, but look at that dial. Absolutely gorgeous with the radial design and the champagne. You can see all of the lume pips here are in perfect shape. They do build Rolexes like tanks, and it's good to see that this one has held up over time. You can really tell the size of the movement comparative to my fingers. It is actually a 20 millimeter movement inside a 26 millimeter case. So we'll remove the dial, and underneath the dial you can see that it has an actual part number. Every single Rolex part has its own individual part number, and this just allows for you to identify them. And when you're looking for one, good luck finding them, but it does help with the identification, that's for sure. There is our hour wheel coming off, and we will remove this plate here that holds down the date ring. Super tiny screws here, but the plate itself is very beautiful. You can see the perlage design on the top, and we'll just unseat it from that date jumper. And it just takes a quick twist of that little locking screw, and then it comes apart like that. Next, we will remove the date jumper wheel, and under here what I'm trying to show you is what I would consider a common pitfall with Rolex watches is that tiny little donut jewel down there. That little guy is hidden underneath this wheel, this calendar wheel, and it's held under spring tension. So if you're not careful and you remove that wheel without knowing it's there, it will ping across the room, and you will be saying what we call the jeweler's prayer. So it's always best to take this away. Tiny, tiny little jewel. Good luck finding that. There is the underside cam of the calendar wheel. Very unique. And then we have the date jumper. So this spring and this little surface right there is what creates the quick set and allows for it to instantly snap to the correct date. So we'll remove that with its integral spring. And we will take off this tension spring that allows for that arm to ride perfectly against the calendar wheel. Next, we will take off the setting lever here, and it has an interesting shape as well as a riveted wheel, and it has this extended arm here that you got to be very careful of when you are removing it because it is fragile and it can break. And here we see the yoke and the yoke spring. The yoke spring is under a high amount of tension and it can ping across the room, so again, be careful with that, as well as the yoke here and this little post that's integral to it. And we will remove the minute wheel and an intermediate wheel. And then there is an intermediate wheel core on this watch that does have a specific orientation. So we're going to quickly make note of how that goes into the watch so that we can repeat it when we put it back together. You could see the extended pivot rising out of the center there, and that is where the actual seconds hand is friction fit to. And so we will remove that core. Next, we have the setting lever that we will remove. You could see a little post down there for the hacking seconds. Next, we'll take out the crown and the stem that's attached to it, and the winding pinion. So the winding pinion on this has very unique teeth, similar to a column wheel, and the sliding clutch, which has equally similar teeth so that they mate properly. And man, look at that movement. We will continue to release some of the energy that's in the mainspring, hopefully all of it, but it just kind of depends because there is some dried up greases and oils that sometimes prevent that from happening. So we got to take the balance out as soon as possible. It is definitely the most fragile part of the entire watch, and we'll check the pivots, make sure that those are in great shape, which they are. That's beautiful little hairspring. And the hairspring is called the hairspring for obvious reasons. It's very small, but precisely engineered for its purpose. So we will take out the pallet bridge here with its tiny little minuscule screws, and we will remove the pallet next. So the pallet is under there, and that pallet is what prevents all of the energy from releasing immediately. And look, there was a little bit of wind left in there, but the pivots on that are in perfect shape. We'll next remove the wig-wag. So the wig-wag is an odd little gear assembly that allows for it to connect and mate with the ratchet wheel. There is an intermediate wheel there that's kind of a quasi crown wheel, and then we'll take out the ratchet wheel here. The ratchet wheel is polished on the underside and then has a radially brushed surface on the top side. Very beautiful. And we will remove this entire bridge assembly here that goes over the barrel. There are a few integral parts here that you'll see as we start the disassembly, but just kind of gently dislodge it from its location. It is a jeweled barrel, and we'll start by removing the click as well as the click spring that's underneath there. And on the click, you can see that tiny little tooth there, which is what grabs and holds the ratchet wheel in place so it doesn't unwind. And here is our crown wheel with its beefy screw. And the crown wheel itself here is kind of stuck, so looks like it's got a good amount of old grease there and a tension spring as well as its own core. So just remove all of those so they get cleaned properly. Next, we'll remove this tiny little plate that holds down the little hacking lever that's underneath there, which did ping across the room, and luckily I found it. So there's that little guy that stops the seconds from moving when you go to set the watch. And we'll take off this bridge here for all of the train wheels. So we unseat it gently with the screwdriver here. Beautiful bridge. You can see the perlage on the top, and just checking the jewels here, and they're all in perfect shape, so that's great. And here we're going to take off the third wheel as well as the great wheel or second wheel with its beefy pinion that you could see right there that mates directly to the barrel, and the extended pivot of the fourth wheel, which is again where the second's hand is friction fit to. They're all in great shape with the escape wheel here, and the pivots look great. Very unique little teeth that mate perfectly with the pallet. And next we'll take out the barrel. So as we're taking the barrel out, and you could see after removing the barrel lid there is quite some grime in here. So we are going to remove that arbor and some of this grime. It looks like it actually might be pieces of finger cots. So this is a perfect example as to why you do not wind these in by hand if you can help it. But we will take out the arbor, and you could see on the arbor there's a little hook that mates into that hole, that slot there on the actual mainspring itself. So we'll unwind this by hand so that it can be cleaned in the ultrasonic. And we'll start by removing this last little plate here on this side, and we're almost done. But I want to take a minute real quick because a lot of people recognize Rolex for the robust little engines that they create that are within their watches, but they don't recognize the beauty in which they do it. It is very intricately built. Look at the little jewel that's on this minute pinion here for that extended pivot to go into. It's just little details like that, as well as the finishing that Rolex isn't always necessarily known for with finishing, but they do it. And it is a shame that most customers never get to see their watch in this light. So that's something that really drives my passion towards watchmaking, is I get to have a really intimate moment taking apart these watches and see how they work. So there's that beautiful hairspring overcoil going back and forth there. Just want to make sure that that's seated correctly prior to reinstall. By using the blower here, we can just make sure and verify that before it goes into the cleaning machine. And here is all of the parts perfectly cleaned and ready for reinstall. We'll start with the barrel that we assembled prior. And here we are adding HP 1300 oil to the minute pinion here as we install this into the movement, as well as its associated plate. And you can see even the top of that has a jewel surface to it, which allows frictionless rotation of the fourth wheel and therefore the second's hand. So we'll start by installing the great wheel there, which mates to the barrel, and we'll add a little bit of Mobius 9010 here to that extended pivot of the fourth wheel, and we'll just gently install that into place, as well as the third wheel here. And then lastly, we will install the escape wheel. And as we rotate this to give ourselves a better vantage point, we will add the bridge here. And to install this, you got to make sure that all the pivots are perfectly aligned. But Rolex has a knack of building these amazing machines that allow for this to just be very easy. That looks way easier than it needs to be. Most are very hard to do and do take quite a lot of time and skill and patience to properly adjust. So Rolex once again shows their prowess as a watchmaker for building incredibly serviceable movements. We will install the barrel bridge here, and we'll start by oiling the topside jewel of the great wheel and the third wheel with HP 1300 oil. Next, we'll put a little wind in the watch, make sure that the power flows freely throughout, which it does. So all of the pivots are sitting properly in the jewel settings, and here's our cleaned crown and stem. Start by adding some grease 9501 to the winding pinion here. This grease is thicker and it's made for metal on metal contact within the watch. Next, we will add the same grease to our sliding clutch here on those specifically machined teeth that mate perfectly with that winding pinion. Sorry, you can't really see it there too well. And then here is the stem getting the same treatment with the same lubrication. We'll insert that into the movement here and make sure that it rotates freely and just kind of slide our clutch back and forth here to make sure it mates properly with the teeth of the winding pinion. So it does, and it looks great. Next, we'll add on the setting lever here. So we'll add a little bit of that same Mobius 9501 to that, making sure to note that it interacts properly with the hacking lever underneath for the balance. We will put on the spring tension bar for the setting lever here so that it stays in place and rotates freely like so. And this allows for the changing of positions between winding and setting of your watch. We will add that little core here for the intermediate wheel, as well as putting a dot of HP 1300 on there, as well as the post for the minute wheel. We'll install both of those here and make sure that they are properly seated, as well as adding a little bit of 9501 to the bottom post of the yoke. And we'll put that in the slot where the yoke sits on the actual sliding clutch and make sure that those interact properly, which they do. By rotating the crown, we make sure that the oils are distributed properly. We will install the yoke spring again with its high tension force, so you got to be careful. I like to use that flat-handed stick to aid in that process. We will install the setting lever here. Just make sure that we oil it properly with a little bit more of that 9501 grease, as well as the spring to the yoke. And we'll do some testing of the positions here. Next, we'll just remove a little bit of that excess grease with some Rodico. And we will be removing the jewels from their individual settings here. You can see the tiny little jewel there in my tweezers. They have their own individual spring settings that allow for shocks to be absorbed without cracking. And these also suspend oil perfectly. So this one in the balance here is actually a little assembly. We'll take that out, and while we're cleaning those, we'll do a little lubrication of the barrel there with some more HP 1300. And here's the jewel after cleaning. So we use one dip, which is a very intensive cleaning solution, and then this oil applicator to apply a tiny little bead of oil right there on the jewel. You could barely see it. And then you just want to be very gentle when you put this back into place, like so. And then that way it perfectly suspends that oil for the pivot beneath. And we will start by reinstalling this shock spring and each of its little separate fingers that slide underneath a lip of the actual Inca block setting as a whole. It's very delicate work, so you have to exercise some patience. Here is the first of two parts for the balance assembly. This is the cap jewel, and you apply a little dot of 9010 to the very center of that jewel, and the hole jewel, which is the second part of this assembly, and it's called that because it has a little hole in it. It's like a donut, and through capillary action, the oil actually holds them together, and that hole is where the pivot of the balance goes in for the top and lower settings so that it oscillates freely and frictionless with that oil perfectly distributed. To me, that is an absolutely mind-blowing and remarkable feat of engineering there. Next, we will add in the pallet, and the pallet is the stopper for all the power. So we'll make sure that we're very gentle in its install, similar to the train wheels. We want to make sure that we do not damage the pivot top and bottom for this pallet. So we will start by installing the bridge very gently, and we'll test the function by putting a little bit of wind into the watch. The wheels will all be held stationary, and we'll just verify that the pallet swings freely back and forth like so, there and there. And now we know that it is perfect, so we will continue tightening it up, and there is the movement coming along so far. So next is the big moment. Here is where we install the balance, the moment I've been waiting for sure. This is the heartbeat of the watch, as they say, and look at that, it kicks right up. This is a beautiful movement. This 2235 by Rolex, absolutely astounding. I love working on these. Definitely one of the smaller Rolex movements I've worked on, but nonetheless exciting. So just checking the hacking seconds there, and it did work and stopped the balance. So we will install the two little screws here that are associated with this bridge. Just be very, very gentle when we do this. Just want to make sure that everything's perfectly aligned before we tighten everything down. So by stopping the balance, we are actually going to start by doing some timing. So there's two little screws on either side there called microstella. They use this associated tool that's kind of odd, but it's got some markers on it that allow you to adjust and rotate those screws. So that's what we're going to do, is we're going to make super tiny adjustments to each side of these screws. And this just allows for you to get better timing out of the watch, more precise. And what you want to do is you want to match both sides so that it rotates perfectly. So we'll put it on the time grapher, and perfect. 0 seconds, 0 beat error, and 293 degrees of amplitude. So we'll clean off the glass here of the case, or really the sapphire rather, and you can see all the little dents and dings that are into that sapphire, but the owner did not want to replace it. She appreciates the memories that she's made with this watch and wants to keep it for as long as she can. So we'll align the hands here and check the functioning of the quick set date that we had talked about earlier. All seems to be in order. Get any little loose debris out of the way before we start recasing the movement. This is getting exciting. We are almost done. So next we will rotate the case clamp screws so that they drop into their associated slots, and we will reinstall the crown. It's going to be a little difficult just because the tightness of these new seals and gaskets that we have there. So once it's in, just verify that the hacking seconds functions properly, which it does, and there's that heartbeat again. Man, I absolutely love looking at these movements under magnification. Hopefully someday I will have the resources so that you guys can see what I see under my microscope, but all adventure starts somewhere, right? Next, we will add the automatic winding module. So this is responsible for the winding of the watch while it sits on your wrist as you move daily, and we'll get it seated right there by just slightly rotating the rotor there. But the rotor, as it winds around the watch, it rotates both these reversing wheels and the driving wheel, which then winds the ratchet wheel beneath. So we want to make sure that in either direction, that driving wheel is still rotating in one direction, which it is. So that is functioning properly and looks great. So we can finish the install here. And it feels great to say that we have completely serviced this Rolex Ladies Datejust 26mm. We'll blow out any little remaining bits of dust here. Check the timing one last time. Looks fantastic. And there is that beautiful little watch. Yeah, it's not perfect. It's got a couple dents and dings, but that's the show of a good life and a watch well worn. Rolexes are made for this, and that is what makes them amazing, is that they can go through all of these life's adventures with you and still come out the other side and be something you can pass down for generations to come. And it is such a blessing to get to work on this beautiful little timepiece, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to do so. Thank you so much for spending your time to watch this video and to come along with me on this adventure of watchmaking as I continue to grow in my skills. I look forward to seeing you guys on the next video. Again, I'm the ChronoFather. Please like and subscribe for more content. Arrivederci.